because I was like, what? Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the very first Just Ask Jen Financial Town Hall of this school year. And we're so excited to be here. Our topic tonight is about understanding the school budgets. And we have a panelist, so I'll just introduce our panelists. First, to my left,
Is Brandon Craig, board member?
and finance chair,
Oh, and chair of the Budget Growth and Finance Committee.
and
And I'm Dr. Moffitt.
speak louder.
I'm Dr. Moffitt, board member.
And then also to my right, we have a very special guest tonight. We have
Alicia Smith, interim deputy superintendent.
we're excited, and she's a great panelist to have tonight because she's been on both sides of the coin, so to speak, on developing the school budgets. You used to be principal, so you had to deal with it then, and now you're in central office and deal with it from an opposite perspective. So she's going to have some great comments.
Very opposite.
So, Dr. Moffitt, would you like to do your spiel on engaging the public for us?
Absolutely, it's always my pleasure. So we are so happy to have you join us today. And if you happen to be in person and you want to speak, you can wade yourself through this large crowd of people and come on down here to the podium and ask a question. Or if you're online, click the reactions icon and then raise your hand. And one of our wonderful staff is going to acknowledge you and then take your question. You can also send a question through the chat to the moderator. And if you're on Facebook, type your question in the comment section, and then we'll get that as well. So we are here to answer your questions. This is the time we're talking about money, and whether you're in person or online, we are here for it. So let's go. Oh, and Rob is the person who's doing that. I forgot this is not a regular committee meeting. This is a Just Ask Jen, so never mind.
Okay.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So, like I said, tonight we're going to be talking about what makes up a school budget, how is it built? And several years ago, when we first started doing these financial town halls, don't play yet. Okay, thank you. I was really struggling with how to present to a community of the non-insider people on how to deal with some of these complicated stuff that we do. And one of the marketing and comms guys said, why don't you try doing an animated whiteboard? And I'd seen them before, and I thought they're really cool. I just never thought to use them. And so we did one, and it was really well received. So this is number 3 now, and I'm really excited to kick off. Normally our format is we do a couple slides. We're not going to do any slides today. We're just going to show you the video, and then we'll talk about it and answer questions, invite any public comment. So have at it, Rob.
Ever wondered how Cincinnati Public Schools decides how much money each school gets? Let's take a look at how they figure it out with a system called student-based budgeting. Every fall, the process starts with a report that counts how many students are in each school. This report also notes special characteristics like if a student has a disability, is learning English, or is gifted. This data is crucial. This information helps the schools predict how many students they'll have next year by looking at the past 3 years' trends. Once these predictions are made, they're shared with each school. This allows schools to make changes based on any special information they know about their students. Next, these student numbers help figure out how many teachers and staff each school needs. This includes classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, counselors, social workers, security staff, clerical support, and assistant principals. Schools also get to decide how many physical education, art, and music teachers they need, but they must have a mix of all 3. The budget for staff is based on average salaries, plus extra costs called fringe benefits. These amounts are updated each year to reflect salary increases, cost of living adjustments, and other changes. The fringe benefits, things like retirement, insurance, and workers' comp, are set at 35% of salaries and wages. Next, CPS calculates the non-personnel budget. This is done by multiplying a per-pupil amount by the number of projected students. Each school's instructional leadership team then decides how to spend this money on things like supplies and field trips. Finally, each school's budget includes extra money for specific costs like copy and printing, clerical overtime, substitute teachers, and stipends for teachers in charge when there's no assistant principal. Let's look at an example of a neighborhood elementary school. According to its projected enrollment for the upcoming school year, the school will be receiving 589 students, with an additional 14 in need of a self-contained classroom environment. This enrollment number directly correlates to the number of staff required. Looking at this example, we see this school is in need of $6,390,074 worth of required staff. Next, let's look at the non-personnel line items. This includes things like printing, and for this school, that would be $47,034. This, in addition to subs and clerical overtime, adds up to a total general fund budget of $6,532,173.61, which is about $10,832.79 per student. Once the general fund budget is determined, we can start building budgets using state and federal grants for additional supplemental costs, which we'll dive deeper into at a later time. High school budgets are more complex because we must ensure funding aligns with the credits each student needs to graduate. High schools also receive similar non-personnel allocations based on their projected number of students. The master schedule is built from the subject credits each student needs, so the school knows how many English, algebra, science, and social studies teachers are needed. There are extra allocations for career tech programs and elective courses. You now have a good understanding of how Cincinnati Public Schools and school leaders determine their budgets. While there are additional funds and complexities like Title I allocations, student activity funds, and other grants, you now have the essential knowledge to see how your local schools are funded. Understanding this process helps us appreciate the careful planning and resources that go into providing quality education for every student.
Well, there you have it. 3 minutes of student-based budgeting. And so I wanted to offer for each panelist to kind of just react to that, have a comment about, or questions even, if you have questions. And then we can open it up to the public for questions of their own. You want to start? Just give us a reaction as a principal. How was that a difficult process to go through?
As a principal, it was not, because we had a lot of time with you guys down here, our accountants, but we knew that we needed to sit with our instructional leadership team. We knew we needed to look at our data, and we were very clear on how much money we had. There was no mistake in that. And so sitting down with your team and looking at what you needed, you already knew how many teachers you were going to need based on our collective bargaining agreement, how many SPED teachers you were going to need if you had gifted kids. So that part was very easy to understand, but it was more learning, looking at the data, how are we going to spend what we have left, and to ensure that it's aligned to what the kids needed so that it impacts student outcomes. So, but it was very easy, and I say that because we had a lot of support from the central office, and people aligned to us to make sure that process went well. And even when we sometimes fussed because we wanted more money or we thought we should have had more here, it still was explained to us very well what we had and why we had what we had.
Right, so every principal is expected to be the advocate for their school and get more stuff, right? So was it hard to get consensus on your ILT and your LSDMC on the things that you had choice on?
I think sometimes it was because everybody wants what they want, right? But I think when you sit down with the team and you talk about the data, you look at what the kids need, you look at what went well last year and what didn't go well, you have a lot of good dialogue. But I think when people get to the why, or why we're spending this money, why this is important for us to spend the money here, you come to consensus. I think the LSDMCs really just want to make sure that we are good stewards with what we have been given, because they're our community partners. And when you can explain that to them in very clear, pointed ways, this is the $10,000 we had left here, and we decided as a school that we were going to get 2 part-time tutors to come in 3 days a week because we have kids at grades 4, 5, and 6 who don't understand foundational math. Great. We decided to spend this $10,000 on additional Orton Gillingham training because we have some students with disability who need some hands-on ways to learn reading. They're good with that, long as they know how and why and when we're spending it, and they can explain it to other people in the community. They're good with that. The IoT is always a very sometimes contentious place where we sit down and just say, look, this is where we are. We don't, or we have a lot of money this year, so everybody's happy. And then next year we're like, oh, we don't have that much money anymore because we're 20 kids down than we were last year, right? So I think it's really about guiding that work and having honest conversations, but I think the data drives those conversations. Looking at where our students fail with their outcomes and looking at the whole child. What do we want to do for our kids all the way around? And how is this money going to benefit us?
Great, thank you. How about from the two of you? Would you like, are any questions or you want to make any comments?
You know, I think one of the things that I take from the video that I think we don't say enough at times is that it always starts with the student, all right? And so some of our schools have faced different challenges with regards to student population decreasing or student population increasing. And how much of that is really built on, how much of that affects our budget, right, on individual cases? So I think one of the things that folks will learn from this is that when we start on the journey of figuring out what your budget looks like, it has to start with the student. I think the second thing that I notice is even the dollar amount in that school example is less than what we know is projected for each student in our from the state level of what it costs to fund a student, right? And I think that's just an example again of why it is so difficult when the amount from the state lessens, is because it really does take away the resources that we have to put directly into the school to say to a principal, these are all the things you need. We know we can do that, but here are the other things that we know a student needs in addition to the bare minimum, right? Well, when they take away a good portion of that pot of money, now we may not take away from that teacher, but we're going to take away from something on that budget line, and that tends to still affect the student. So I just think it is a crucial thing to pay attention to, that the total dollar per student, even when we're doing all these different things in the school, may not meet to what some folks think we're getting per student.
So in this example, the average per spend was 10,800. I don't remember the exact amount, but the state-based cost is $8,100, right? So that just tells you, and then we only get 36 cents on the dollar for that. So our local property taxes have to make up the difference, and then our choices become more difficult when the money gets spread thinner. Dr. Moffitt?
So, you know, I always come with a lot of questions, and today will be no exception to that. So I want to, and I know this answer, but I think you two are the best to explain this to the public. This did a great job in 4 minutes of speaking in generalities, but I know there are different prices for different students. For instance, our students with special needs get more funding, but they also cost more as well. So, and I also know that there's a date where the state determines that count. That's what I put on here, count of the number that you all shared that is the expected enrollment. Can you talk about how the count gets determined, like how that number, I know we project, but then what's the final thing that we get paid for? And then also, what happens when in the springtime we usually see this influx of students that didn't get measured in our count? Can you talk about how that impacts us financially?
So some of that's an old formula concept, and that's changed. But I will tell you, so the projections are based, student projections that we do in the fall for the building of the next school year are based on a 3-year average, and then we modify it based on conditions that we know about. And that's at the school level down to the grade level. So by school, by grade, they look for retention, promotion rates, special conditions. In September, the internal district switches to actual enrollment, and then we adjust everybody. That's called the Teacher Allocation Committee, which everybody has come to love and hate.
I think more hate than
And that
love.
happens in September, and so sometimes staff have to move around and they're unhappy about it, and parents are unhappy, but we have to sift the resources where they're needed. In terms of the state, we start reporting, it used to be the first full week in October was our October count, and that's what we got funded for. And that was it for the year. Now we report every month and the money adjusts as we report. So as students come in, we report more students, we get proportional funds for the rest of the year versus, or if they leave, we got to keep the money that we had while we were there, or they were with us. And then so when the money comes in and out, or students come in and out from other systems, we do get some funding for that.
Okay, good. So that's good to know.
Yes.
So the public will know that I got that question and I was like, well, I don't
Yeah,
quite know
the
the
old
answer, but-
formula had a hard time dealing with that, so they've adjusted it so that we do report. And we get paid twice a month from the state, so that once a month, those numbers get updated.
okay. And so, okay, with regard to Dr. Smith, when you talked about the LSDMCs and ILTs working on the budget, can you talk about how you got the LSDMCs to understand the budget? Oh, I don't know why you don't have a mic. Is she gonna get one?
I did, but
So, according to board policy, the LSDMCs need to sign off on the budget. Is that right?
yes.
And so, how do you get lay people, community members, parents, to really understand the needs of the school? Because they just see, I've been an LSDMC chair and I've seen like, oh my gosh, the budget is $14 million. Whew, that's a large number. But even still, that's a huge number. But how do you get that understanding at that level at the schools so that parents, community members, staff all can buy in? Because they have to sign off on it, right?
They do. I think the best way is always transparency. I think sharing it with them as often as possible. And I think really explaining to them what it is. Like, this is what the number is, but this is why we get the money. This is how we get the money. I think explaining that every child has a dollar amount that comes with them, and that's to cover all the needs of the child in the school. And I think consistently sharing it with them. So not just when you get it and we got to have you sign off on it, but like monthly explaining this is what we're going to do with the money. I think also a lot of times we would write out the plan to the LSDMCs and say, this is $20,000 and we've decided as an instructional leadership team that we would like to do the 5 following things with this. And this is how it's going to impact the school. This is how it's going to impact the students. This is how it's going to build capacity of the teachers. And this is how we're going to show you the benefits of it. This is how the teachers are going to come back and work with it. I think the constant conversation around it and answering the questions honestly and saying, this is really what we have to work with. And this is what we decided we're going to do based on what we saw our students needed. But I think the more you do it, and it just doesn't happen. Like right now, here we come a day before the budget is due. Now I'm trying to tell you why. I think once you get it passed by the ILT, sharing it with your LSDMC and giving them time to process it and give them time to ask you questions about it, even creating a Google Doc where they can put questions in and you can answer back and say, hey, this is what we're doing. I think the more they hear it and the more you have conversations about it, LSDMCs are become okay with it. Now they become concerned, like we had some that were concerned last year because they were losing things, and sometimes we had to go talk to the principals from my seat and say, have you explained to them why? And sometimes they would say, I did, but they said they still wanted to write the board, right? I said, but make sure you do the why. And they would say, we did, but they're just not happy that we're doing it, and they want to exercise their right to share that they're unhappy, but they understand why. But I think keeping it in front of them, and even like having just quarterly, this is where we are. Like we got our budget, here's an update to our budget. Or even when you get more Title I, sometimes it's not always bad news, it's good news. We got more Title I funds and we're gonna be able to spend it. This is what the ILT decided. I wanted to share that with you. But I think the transparency and consistently sharing it with the LSDMC gets people on board to know why we do it, how we do it, and why we do it.
Have you ever had a situation where the LSDMC pushed back, wrote to the board or whatever, and then some things changed?
No, not really, because normally I've had them push back. I've had them not understand why. So for instance, when TAC comes, it's normally when LSDMCs are most unhappy because parents begin to voice their concern about losing a teacher. And their kids love that teacher. And we're happy they love that teacher, but the teacher now has to go across the street even, right? Because they have 50 more kids than they thought they were going to get. They will push back and they will be angry and they're going to write you guys a letter. But most time that doesn't change it, right? Because the allocation has to go where the kids are. And I think just continuing to explain it, I know none of us like it. Nobody wants to do it, but it has to be done because of the actual numbers that show up in the school. So yes.
Gotcha. I'll save my questions.
Do we have any questions from the public? We'll just pause there and respond to the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, our first is a comment from Facebook, Jen, that you might want to just reply back to. It said something like, it's a line from Philadelphia. Talk to me like I'm a kindergartner. The presentation costs, and they're referring to the video, probably costs as much as a para annual salary. So I think just to talk about that video did not cost, explain a little bit that the video did not cost the annual salary of a paraprofessional.
Oh, no, the video was my time and the production of the video was just $200 or $300. Honestly, it was very small cost.
And the cost of a para is how much?
With benefits, about $40,000 a year. Yeah. So,
I think this also, though, gets into so important. You're talking about transparency, but I think this is why this is such an important thing to pay attention to, because there is budget for us to do projects like this that don't cost a whole lot, but are really informative. And I think sometimes folks dismiss the information because it's not in the format they would want it to see, or think that there's an assumption that we spent millions of dollars to put together this presentation, when in fact we spent hours of work for people who are in central office to communicate out, to make sure that everybody understands how our budgets at the school levels work. And I think that's the value of something like this, is that it can sit out there in the ether and someone can come back and say, a new person on an LSDMC can sit down and say, you know what, I'm not understanding why we only got 11, English teachers this year instead of 12 like we had last year. And you go, well, we got 60 less students. So, when the value of something like this is more than its dollars that we spent and the hours you all spent working on it.
well, and also it's posted on our website so that it can be watched over and over and over again whenever people need to be reminded or they just come on board and watch it. And it's certainly more entertaining than me standing there doing PowerPoint slides. So I do appreciate the sentiment, though, that our public is really challenge our thinking about what we spend our money and how we spend the money. And my number one rule is good financial stewardship. So I do appreciate the comment very much. Is there more questions?
Yeah. What's the difference between a school budget and the district budget and how they differ?
Oh, that's a great question. So we have 65 different school budgets, right? Because they all have different needs. And so they're all basically calculated the same based on their needs. Then the central office starts budgeting after that, and they have to do build their budgets to support their operation in addition to supporting like strategic initiatives. So the district budget is a consolidation of all the school budgets and all the central office budgets together. For example, my treasurer's office, we have a budget that, we run the payroll department and the accounts payable department, the budgeting team and the grants team and financial technology. So all those needs, they add up. The transportation department has a budget, and marketing and communications. And so all those things add up to equal the district budget. And that's the general operating budget.
And that is currently, what's the budgeted amount or budget for the district?
$628 million, rounded.
So who decides what goes into a school budget? I know you touched on this a little bit, but maybe like a harder answer of like, these are the individuals, the decision makers, before it comes back to the district as a whole and the board.
So as the video explains, the staffing gets built based off of formulas that are mostly collective bargaining agreement defined. And then sometimes it's by state law, state or federal law, and sometimes it's just a district policy. But for the most part, all formulas are applied across the district. Once that gets to the school, then it becomes the school's instructional leadership team to work through the non-personnel and even some of the staffing decisions. So even though, so for every load-bearing teacher, which means a teacher that grants grades, for every 7 of those, they get 1 allocation to do the fine arts, PE, art, music, technology, library, right? They get to decide what subjects those are, as long as they have a half of an each of PE, art, and music. That was a board policy change, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 years ago. So the school has a lot of decision-making, not as much as they used to because our resources have declined, but they do have a lot of influence on how the money gets spent. Then the local school decision-making committee, and I'm going to ask Dr. Smith to define the difference, is they get to approve the budgets for the schools. So can you help identify the difference between our acronyms, the ILT, the LSDMC?
The acronyms?
The different roles.
Oh, so yeah, so the instructional leadership team is made up of our staffing at the schools. So you have to have a representation of teachers, admin, community, like paraprofessionals, the staff, everybody should be represented on IoT. LSDMC is community, is staff, is teachers, it's paras, it should be a student on there. So parents, I mean, it's just, it's made up of those, and it's like 3 of each. Like, and they're voted in, and they decide who's gonna be on there, and they serve a term. They're on there for a certain amount of time. IOC is the same way. So once someone gets on IoT is consisted of our team leaders, the people that actually run the school. That's the difference in who's on each one of those.
Yeah, the next question is a follow-up. You talked a little bit about the collective bargaining agreement. How does that affect schools, and why is that so important?
Well, the collective bargaining agreement is our guiding document that makes sure we stay in line with what we have agreed upon with the union. It impacts the school because there are guidelines that say how many students can be in a classroom. As Jen said, after you get 7 teachers, how many fine art teachers, special needs, how many paraprofessionals would be in those classrooms. Also, if we have gifted, you get gifted counselors. If you have a certain amount of ELL students, you get ELL support and coordinators. So the CBA lists those things, and those things are agreed upon when we negotiate with the union. So it's very important because it's our guiding document on how we operate in schools with what we can and can't have within those guidelines to make sure we are following our CBA and our district policy.
You're doing great.
You're doing great. I was going to say the same thing. This is a lumped together. What's the primary sources for funding in school budgets? And then how does state and federal regulations influence school budgets and state and federal, funding back and forth? So I know this was covered in the video, but.
Okay, so the first question was about the resources on that come from for school budgets.
Yeah, what goes into, where are the primary sources of school budgets?
Right, so the district is mainly, the general operating fund is mainly funded by 2 sources, which is the state foundation formula and local property taxes. Because our school boards, what's the word I'm looking for? Enjoy local decision-making on school boards across the state. They say that the local decision-making gets to help raise their own funds. And that's based off of a wealth factor in the district. This is gonna get really complicated very quickly. The wealth factor in the district is based upon 3 factors. 1 is property values, 2 is the federally adjusted gross income, and 3 is median income. And they calculate all that, and then they index you to the 40th district in the state. There's 613. Why they picked the 40th, I don't know. And we haven't figured it out. And then it becomes, so your economics are relative to what's the economics of what's happening in the rest of the state. So things shift without you realizing it. Anyway, the state funding formula represents only about 40% of our funding in the general fund, while our property taxes represent the rest. And so those are the sources, so that we just have a pot of revenue, and then it gets allocated out to the schools, and then to central office. So that was the first question. What was the second one again?
How do federal regulations influence, state and federal regulations influence school budgets?
Well, there are a lot of federal and state regulations, and we can't choose to violate any of them. The first one, the biggest one, is on what's it, fair and equitable
Public
education,
something like that.
right?
Fate.
Act, yeah. So it helps guide and give us rules on our students with special needs. And so that they are, just because they have students with disabilities, they are just deserve free education as well. And so, and fair education as well. So that's one guide. Then we have guidance where we can't overspend our budgets. We can't spend in a deficit. We can't spend without authority. And I'm trying to think of some federal guidelines are on the federal grants. Federal grants are given to us for a specific purpose, and we can only spend the money on that purpose. And so, for example, Title III, because we've been talking about English language learners, there's a grant, it's about $1 million a year to help supplement what we do for English language learners, which, considering the explosion of our English language learners, $1 million doesn't go very far. But so there are a lot of we are very heavily compliant driven.
I can add one additional thought to that, and I think this is where we always need to pay attention to legislation as it comes through, is that some legislation also carries I think the affectionate term that is used is unfunded mandates along with them. So schools are now required to do certain things as legislation passes that then we are not given additional funds to do, nor are we told how we were supposed to come up with these additional funds. And so I think at times those little changes in state law can, it can add $1 million to a budget real quick. And when you talk about from the school level of that budget, you may have one school that's more affected than another, or some of the high school or mandates versus some of the elementary school mandates.
So thank you for saying that, because we actually have 2 new ones that came up this year, or are coming up this year. The first one is the Science of Reading stipend. So every teacher in our district that teaches reading has to take this course. We have to pay them a stipend, and then we have to ask for reimbursement. So that could become like a cash flow issue for a smaller district that doesn't have a whole lot of extra funds. So that's the first one. And the amount of tracking and chasing down, however many, I mean, we have 6,000 employees, 4,000-ish are in the collective bargaining agreement, and probably a third of them take changes. So we have to chase these people down and make sure they do it, right, for compliance. The second one is the newest one, and it's the fraud prevention training that we're required to do by the state auditor for every employee, coaches, athletic coordinators, club advisors, teachers, paras, everybody that gets a paycheck from Cincinnati Public Schools has to take this training by November 29th. And the amount of time and effort it takes us to track people down, remind them, educate them, support them while they're doing it. It's an easy, I mean, watching the video is really easy, but some people have trouble downloading the certificate, uploading it into our system. And that's just time that we could be doing other things, right? I mean, it's important to know, because cyber fraud, financial fraud is huge. I mean, I took a class on it. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It is huge. And everybody can be a victim, and because it's the most innocent things you do can cause a problem. So it is super, super important for everybody to do that. But we didn't get any resources to do it with, right? And we're already struggling with balancing budgets. So got on my soapbox. So take your class. Take the class and submit it quickly.
We have another question from Facebook, and we appreciate everyone watching, by the way. Who determines the number of students, or how students are capped in a school building overall?
So that's a great question, because overall, we're not allowed to turn kids away in terms of a district. Neighborhood schools don't turn kids away, or they shouldn't, ever. The magnet schools, ever. The magnet schools are a little bit different because they're programmatic requirements, and so they do have to allow only a certain number of kids, and it depending on how kids flow through. Like a Montessori would only accept preschool and kindergarteners and maybe first graders up to a certain level of class, but their program dictates their size. So if they over accept, then they're driving the staffing to go up. And they may not have space for them. Do you want to add anything to that?
Also, the size of the building determines, like, we can get really crowded, but if we have a 450, 500 building and we're at 550, we try to see if we can work with other neighborhood schools, but we try to stay within those limits so that we're not busting out of seams. We've been there and we make it work. We've had classes on carts, but really the size of the building too is important besides the programs that students are in. So, and we want to fill all of our buildings up, so no worries.
Well, there are worries, but we want to fill all our buildings
We
for
welcome
sure.
all, we welcome all. Yeah. But this is a good point, a time to talk about the ad hoc committee work that we recognize when we built our beautiful facility master plan buildings. The population has shifted since we did all those decisions. I recall I used to be on the redistricting team back then and helped build all those boundaries. And so now we need to readjust them because populations have shifted for a lot of reasons. And so that we can use our buildings a little bit more effectively. So just a shout out to the ad hoc committee.
We accept it.
I think that in line with that too, though, is that we've noticed, especially with the concentration of poverty in certain parts of our city, that the needs of the students, so it's not even just that we have more students in a school, but if you got more students and those students need more things, that can put a huge strain on a school where you have an overpopulation in the school and you've got a number of kids who have some form of a special need or additional learning or individual education plan, and you're now trying to feed those kids. You're trying to make sure those kids get on the bus. You got more kids getting on the bus than you expected to have ever. And so we see those populations, and I think it'd be very curious also we talked a lot about when the population decreases, but for a school budget, when you have a really packed full school where you're trying to budget out stuff and also you're needing more resources in that school based on what the student population looks like, how does that affect, ultimately, I think you were talking about like trying to talk with other neighborhood schools, but how does it also affect how that school, that principal, has to think about those conversations with their ILT, with their LSDMC about what our plan is to address. I know we've had a number of folks come in and talk about like the fact that you might need a new assistant principal now that you've reached a certain level because you've got this many more students than you planned on having the previous year.
I think I've been on both sides as a principal. Like, when I was in Price Hill on the west side, we were busting out of seams. I had 700 something kids in the K-8 building. And then I was down at Rothenberg where we were barely reaching 400, right? I think the best part for me, and I say this in the most sincere way, is that when we get to those spaces, like we literally can call down to central office and say, hey, listen, I need to sit down with somebody because now my population has grown tremendously. We don't have the space. I'm gonna have to put some teachers like art on a cart. Nobody wanted art on the cart, but we had to do art on the cart, right? I think, people want a lot more money, but when you get the kids, you get more money, but there's a lot more responsibility. There's a lot more things you have to maneuver. There's changes that you have to make, and class sizes are bigger, so you're trying to stay within compliance of the CBA. But CPS, we make it work because that's what we do. And so we've learned to make some adjustments, and where we could help each other out in neighborhood schools, and parents were open to that, not just putting people out, but having conversations with parents. And sometimes the schools are closer to where they live at, but they may have been in your building and moved, right, and didn't change. And you're like, those are our people, right? The kids become our people, like, so we know not trying to put people out, but I think having those very rich conversations about where we are, what we want to do, and how we're going to do it, again, back to that IoT is so critical. Sitting down with your instructional leadership team, sitting down with those teams that are being impacted the most, because it's not always the whole school. It could be fourth grade went from 60 to 130 in 2 days, right? And so, and then maybe asking the teacher, your certificate says you're 1-8, we may have to move you to fourth grade. And so I think you're right, Brandon, it's a lot of moving around. But again, I go back to, it's that transparency. It's really being genuine with people and saying, listen, everybody wanted more kids. Y'all wanted more copies. Y'all wanted more money for tutors. We got the money. Now we got to figure out how we're going to make this work so that everybody is comfortable. And so on both sides, I've been on the other side at Rothenberg where we didn't have an assistant principal. I had about 400 and some kids, sometimes felt like 800. And we didn't have all of that funding. And then at one point we were rich because we had the SIG grant, right? And then where we could sit down and everybody was like, ooh, we can get this and we can do this. And you get to dream a little bit, right? So I think it's that opportunity on both sides. So how are we gonna go back to what you guys have been saying the whole time? How are we gonna go back to the kids? Let's start with what we're gonna do for the kids, then talk about how we're gonna support the teachers, then how are we gonna communicate it to our families, and then genuinely saying this is the best that we can do, and we believe it's the best for your kids for this time right now while they're in our building.
I think to your point, and to your point also, Board Member Craig, and Jen, we build the buildings, and then within 10 years, we've probably shifted out of the buildings, or some buildings we want to use them more efficiently, but also the needs of our students have changed in that ad hoc noticed that middle school students, true middle schools, not just junior high, but like 6th, 7th, 8th grade over time, that population has needs that are really not being benefited in a 7 through 12 building at all. And we spent all this time, but 10 years ago, moving to a 7 through 12 building, only to find that we got them out of a K through 8 building because they kind of didn't fit in there. And they're not really fitting in the 7 through 12 building. And so that was a lot of the work of the ad hoc, is to notice that what are the staff saying? The staff are saying this population has been kidnapped by aliens. They need something different, and we need to put them somewhere. We also had buildings that were underutilized, and we don't want to close a building. We want to use our buildings more efficiently. There is Ohio Revised Code on what happens when you have to close a building. We would have to sell our building. First right of refusal is to charters, and we don't want to do that. But we also have these beautiful buildings that the community spent time investing in, and we don't want to close them. So we made the initiative to say, hey, let's look at that model. But that happened, and then concurrently, our students are transient. COVID happened, and our students, some students move twice a year, some students even 3 times a year. Within the same academic year, they've been to 3 different schools. And so their needs academically are going to change. Their needs socially and emotionally are going to change. And we've also got them maybe being middle schoolers. And so we do a really great job of trying, as a district, I think, trying to not only be fiscally responsible, but also do that and use our buildings efficiently, listen to the community and what they want, and keeping the students' needs at the forefront. They change. They just change. COVID has done a really great job in exposing some things that we need to keep in mind immediately. And if we're focusing on the student, which we've said that we all do, their needs change like the wind. And so we've done a great job at doing that too. But we're trying to be fiscally responsible. We're trying to do this and be as efficient as we can and adhere to state regulations, which aren't always I'm channeling my board member Morosky, former board member Morosky. They don't always like our kids at the state level. And so public education is under attack currently. It's going to be under attack in the future, but we're doing the best we can with what we have, and it's not always fair. It doesn't feel fair all the time. It doesn't always seem like it's necessarily the best choice, but we've made the choices that we have with what we've had to deal with regarding the federal and the state regulations. You guys do an awesome job, so.
I think I agree. I think this is a great time to reimagine and re-envision what we're going to do with our middle schools, our middle schoolers. I was a K-8 principal, right? And it seemed like as soon as we got them figured out, it was time to move them, right? We're like, okay, and don't think we didn't celebrate now. Don't think. I mean, I love middle schoolers, but I'm excited about the opportunity to reimagine what a middle school would look like for those young people who have all kind of emotions going on, trying to figure out who they are. And then now with social media, all those things are happening for our young people. But also, I think the key to going back is what you and the board have been saying, I know continuous, is engagement as we begin to move in those spaces that we've been moving in. And I know I keep saying it, but I learned this the hard way. Transparency matters. As a principal, and I think I'm protecting people, but people want to know. Tell me the why we're doing what we're doing. Tell us that, and I've been saying to people when they ask, I'm like, listen, the bottom line is we got to fill our buildings. It's the middle schoolers need something different. It's going to save us money. We're trying to be fiscally responsible. We don't want to have empty buildings. Listen, if a building is under this number, we're absorbing the cost of it at the district level. Just trying to get them to understand the why. I think as we spend time explaining to people the why, people will have an understanding that this is not personal and we don't dislike this community over this community, but these are the hard decisions that we have to make. And I think it's going to be good if you give us an opportunity to explain the why of what we're doing and that engagement and letting people say what they want to say, because none of us are going to be happy. I live in Evanston. I don't want Evanston to go. I didn't want it to change from Hoffman to Evanston. I mean, hey, I went to Hoffman. So, but it changed. I'm like, who told them to name the school that? But guess what? Parham, all my family we called it Parham. It was Parham all of a sudden. So we all go through those growing pains of things that we're attached to, but when we understood why, we're trying to make things much better for everybody. But I'm excited about that middle school because I love middle school kids, because probably that's my personality. But I think it's gonna be great for them, and so I'm excited about that.
How about from the public? Any more questions?
Oh yeah, Facebook's been asking a couple questions, so
Wow.
they've been great. We're glad to see everyone on there. Great questions coming from Facebook, so thank you everyone. How does the district ensure equitable funding is allocated to the elementary schools who do not qualify for Title I funding?
So that's a great question because Title I funding is supposed to be supplemental. So it's not equal, it's equitable because the general fund is allocated the same based on the formula. So that's equitable, equal. Title I is supposed to be supplemental to serve up and above beyond what the general fund does to serve students who are economically disadvantaged. I'm going to say that 3 times. And so it inherently doesn't become, it's equitable because the students have those extra needs versus a building that's not Title I who doesn't have the economically disadvantaged challenges that the other schools do. I hope that answered it. Anybody want to add anything to that?
I would just add the one little part that I think with all of the title funds, there's a purpose to those dollars that is uniquely indifferent. So even with Title I, there's a purpose to that dollar, as you said, to supplement, not to just educate. Yeah, and so if it's just there to educate, those dollars are shared, again, based on students, based on factors of buildings and these other things that we utilize in there. But for Title I schools specifically, there's a dedicated amount of dollars that can be used for specific purposes also. So it is not just your Title I eligible school, so we just give you extra money. As limited reasons it can be used.
So the state uses a supplement supplant rule to check our spending and how we allocate the resources. And they look at a maintenance of effort to make sure that we're not replacing the general fund spend with title funds so that we can spend general fund on something else. So I guess over the years, people have tried things and they've come up with new rules to counterbalance that. But the supplement versus supplant, so anything that's in the anything that's part of the core academics or that's defined by the collecting our bargaining agreement has to be paid for out of the general fund. It's the additional services that we can start using state and federal grants to layer on top of the general fund services. And so that's where the supplement versus supplant comes from. Supplant would be to replace, and a supplement would be to be on top of. So I hope that helps.
So give an example, Jen. So I'm thinking of Fairview when they wanted the reading specialist and they weren't title, but then they, like, I'm trying to think of a
Right,
specific
so-
example so that the public understands what that
Right,
meant.
so years ago, everybody wanted laptop cards, and people were using Title I monies to do laptop cards. Well, then we couldn't then go do laptop cards for the non-title schools using general fund, because that is a supplant. So it has to be above and beyond what everybody else in the district is doing, right?
So we don't have schools that are not getting funded. I think that the misconception is, hey, the Title I schools are getting more than the non-title schools. I
They
should
are
say it that
getting
way.
more,
Well, but everyone is getting their first share.
right?
And so it's not that they didn't get a share, everybody's getting a share. And then because you're a title school, the federal government has said, hey, the socioeconomics of that building is lower and we need to give them additional
Resources, right.
resources. So that's what that is. So
Exactly.
everybody gets their share, and then title schools are recognized a little
Right, so
bit.
that, we just talked about Title I. So Title II-A is about improving teacher quality. So that money has to be spent on development, professional development, and helping teachers increase their effectiveness. Title III is helping English language learners. Title IV is safe and drug-free schools. So those monies have to be spent on creating a culture that's safe, and which entails a lot of things, but having a positive school culture and no drugs.
But I also want to share too, Title III, you mentioned earlier, is $1 million. We have a population that needs our ESOL population. In order for us to effectively educate them, it costs more than $1 million. So we are still providing monies from the general fund to compensate that, right?
Right, so I'm looking at my audience member here. Do you remember how, we did this comparison recently, how much did we spend in English language learners
We did this for
out of the
budget.
general fund last year?
We talked about it in budget.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
so
around 12 million.
12 million, and then the title grant is 1 million. So we're spending way above and beyond. Then we're getting resources for, not complaining, although we would like more resources. We do value all of our students, and so it just becomes a bigger challenge when we're trying to cover all the core academics.
This is also an issue that will continue to expand in our area because we have a growing population of students who are coming from families that are, their primary language is not English. It's a growing area of our population.
And did you know that I was an ESL student when I came to the United States?
Wow, wow. Did not know that. Trivia question number 1.
I went to Spain in kindergarten. So I came back. So anyway, so the ESL population is near and dear to my heart. I also have an adopted daughter who from Haiti who had the same issue. So we've been through a lot of that. So
Thank you. Great discussion, everyone. Are ELA spaces, spaces without walls, considered classrooms and buildings?
sometimes they're used to convert into classrooms when populations shift rather suddenly and they've maxed out their classrooms and their class sizes. So our facilities department, who was honored at the last board meeting, reacts very quickly to those needs to the best of their ability and within financial reason. And sometimes they do have to be used as classrooms. I don't know if you want to add anything.
We absolutely have to use them as classrooms. We usually put some type of nice partition around the teacher, makes it very nice so that it's a quiet space because there are bathrooms there. But when your building needs to be occupied and the classroom space is out, we use it for that. When it's not, we use it for pull-out spaces. We've done all of what's necessary, but it is a nice space. It is a large space, and the kids have everything they need in that space. Technology is in that space. A place for the teacher to hang up her work is in that space. So everything they need is in that space.
So before I forget, after that next question, just hold that thought. Can you flip to the schedule of the next town halls? We want to talk about that a little bit first. So today's September 3rd. I can't believe it's September already. My goodness.
I know.
October 1st is going to be a different kind of conversation as we're talking about as the role of the treasurer, since we just very recently publicly announced my retirement next September. We wanted to start engaging in the conversation while we begin the looking for a firm that will do the RFP to do the search, so to speak. So do you want to say anything more?
Just that this is a important thing for the folks who see the superintendent, they see the board a lot, but the treasurer's role is a really unique one, and especially in the state of Ohio. So this is why this is also really important, because you can't just come from anywhere to be a treasurer in Ohio for whatever reason. We've decided as a state to make it harder for all the school districts to hire someone, but it is really important because of the state that we're in and the specifics that go into being a treasurer in the state of Ohio.
So yeah, the October 1st, we're going to have a panel just to talk about what is the role and how is it important between partnerships between the superintendent and we're hoping our chief internal auditor will be able to join us as well. November 12th, we're going to talk about how districts are funded. So today we talked about how schools are funded. We're going to go into much more detail about the district's funding. And then in December, we're going to talk about levies, because we will have a renewal up for next November 25. And we have some options to think about. And so we want to start educating, reminding the board all the different options and engaging the public so they can help us stabilize our financing. So how many minutes do we have left?
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so the next one will be a quick answer and a shout out first. One of our Facebook followers said, yes, all middle schoolers should have their own building, by the way. Just a shout out from a parent that says, please, please, please. But yeah, so wonderful. And then our last question, is there a formula for Title I funds that is dependent upon the state report card? If a school improves their report card, do they lose Title I funding even though their population hasn't changed?
So the Title I budgets are based on a per pupil value. And based on the economics, so there's like a declining balance. The rules for applying the Title I budget are based on some factors, or at least they were the last 2 years. And so as we rethink next year's budget, we'll consider what those factors are, and then or if they're still applicable or not. But for example, if you had a weakness in, if you're a high school and you had an attendance rate of X, or below X, then you received a school social worker of attendance. If your report card graduation rate was Y, no, below Y, I don't remember the exact measures, but below 2, they received a counselor that focused on graduating our students. And so it's really data driven, and the first year we did it was very painful. People were very upset about what they felt was a lot of loss of power and decision making. But we're really trying to drive the resources to where the biggest needs are. And so if they get better, they don't lose funding. It's just their title allocation gets spent differently based on whatever their new needs are.
That was great. Thank you.
Well, and thank you, everybody. Thank you all for my panelists for spending the evening with me, especially you and Jane. You did awesome. We'll look forward to, if there's more questions that come in, we'll respond to them. But we're always looking for new ideas on the town halls. I was actually invited to do a town hall on our communications truck. So we're going to actually go to a school site and do it. And Rob, you may not know this, surprise.
Now
So
you know.
We'll pick what day that is, and we'll make that sure we can announce it on the public website. But any closing comments?
Well, I was just going to say maybe we should talk levies and then title, because title continues to be a question that the community has around what is title, how can we spend title. So I think maybe just ask Jen about title is definitely in order.
It's on the list in a future, probably more as we're doing the budget, so it becomes a little bit more relevant. But yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So I will just give my closing remarks. I am super excited to have Dr. Smith be our guest this time. And Jen, again, I've done these with you. This was our brainchild, and this has not disappointed. If you have any questions for us, we are talking about the district money. We are trying really hard to be transparent. And this is the Just Ask Jen. I don't know what we're going to call it when you retire. We'll have to think about that. We'll make up a new one, but thank you so much for joining us.
The mimosas with Mike.
Money matters. We don't know. Thanks again. If you do have any questions, send them in. We'll get them answered.